I should have known something was off when my husband kissed me on the forehead before bed. He hadn't done that in over a year. Not since he lost his job. Not since I stopped covering for him with the mortgage. That night, he tucked me in like a man who'd already made up his mind and was just waiting for the right moment to tell me. I'm Julia. I'm 42. I teach second grade at an elementary school just outside Ann Arbor. I've been married to Eric for almost 11 years. Or, I was. We didn't have a fancy life. Just a 2-bedroom townhouse, a half-dead ficus he swore he'd replant, and a schedule of frozen dinners and DVR'd Jeopardy episodes. And honestly, I thought that was enough. Eric used to be a design engineer at a firm in Detroit. Smart guy, charming in that fixes your sink and makes a joke while doing it kind of way. He got laid off during the pandemic and just never really bounced back. I told myself it was the economy. Then I told myself it was depression. Then I told myself love meant patience. But looking back, I think what I was really doing was covering for someone who gave up a long time ago. I picked up a side job tutoring on weekends. I started skipping lunch to grade papers so I could stay late to supervise aftercare for extra pay. I worked myself into a stupor while Eric sat in the basement researching passive income ideas and trying to flip collectible sneakers on eBay. And through all of that, my mom, Elaine, was the only person who ever pulled me aside and said, "Julia, be careful you're not the only one rowing the boat." But I brushed it off. Told her she just didn't like Eric because he wasn't buttoned up like my dad had been. She didn't argue. She never really argued, just watched. Quietly, like a person who already knew how the story ended. She passed away in January. Stroke, no warning, no second chance. One morning I was arguing with her over the phone about who was hosting Easter. That night she was gone. I never got to say I was sorry. Never got to tell her she'd been right about more things than I wanted to admit. The week after the funeral, I was so numb I couldn't even cry. Eric handled everything. Called the funeral home, coordinated with the church, even picked out flowers. People kept telling me how lucky I was to have a man like that. And for a second, I believed them. Then the will came. Mom left me everything. Not just her house, but stocks I didn't know she had. A savings account with over $700,000 and, most surprising of all, partial ownership in a children's publishing company. I found that out sitting across from her lawyer, hands shaking, wondering if they'd mixed me up with someone else. When I told Eric, he looked at me like I'd just told him we won the lottery. He hugged me tight, whispered how proud he was, said, "Your mom always believed in you." But it didn't take long for that hug to turn into suggestions. A new SUV, a vacation in Hawaii, a kitchen remodel. He started sending me Zillow listings with backyard pools and home theaters. Said things like, "We could finally upgrade," or "You've worked hard enough, you deserve to enjoy it." I wanted to be excited. I really did. But every time he said "we," something inside me clenched. It wasn't our money. It was a legacy. My mother's life's work. Every penny she didn't spend on herself, every coupon she clipped, every birthday she skipped buying something for herself so she could save it for me. So I said no, not all at once. Just gently. Let's wait. I'm not ready to make big decisions. I want to process everything first. That's when he changed. He stopped kissing me goodnight. Stopped texting me during the day. The man who used to make me tea before work suddenly forgot I existed. He started going on walks that lasted hours. He left dirty dishes in the sink. He even started sleeping in the guest room, said I needed space. And the thing is, I didn't get angry right away. I got confused, then sad, then ashamed. Like somehow I had broken something by not giving him what he wanted. I found him in the garage one night talking to someone on speaker. He didn't know I was listening. He said, "I'm not worried. If she won't share, I'll just take half when we split." That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the bathroom floor with the light off, reading every word of my mother's will for the first time. That's when I found it. A single line, buried deep in the legal language, highlighted in blue ink like she knew I'd miss it. My estate shall only be dispersed if my daughter Julia is no longer legally married at the time of settlement. No current or future spouse may access, manage, or benefit from this estate, directly or indirectly. I stared at the page so long my legs went numb. The man I married thought he'd struck gold. He had no idea he'd just walked straight into my mother's last checkmate. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't scream or throw the will in his face like I wanted to. Instead, I climbed into bed and lay next to the man who, just hours before, had been on the phone planning how to gut me in a divorce. I stared at the ceiling until morning, thinking about all the birthdays I'd baked him a cake from scratch. The Christmases I'd wrapped socks and tools in tissue paper because he once said he missed practical gifts. The nights I stayed up editing his resume when he swore this one was the job that would turn everything around. I thought about my mom. About how she'd probably seen all this coming years ago. About how I'd rolled my eyes when she said, "Some people don't change. They just get better at hiding who they are." And still, after everything, a part of me hoped maybe I was wrong. Maybe Eric had said those things in the garage out of frustration. Maybe he was just venting to a friend. Maybe it didn't mean anything. That hope evaporated 2 days later. I came home from school early. Parent-teacher conferences got canceled last minute because of a power outage. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I called out for Eric, and there was no answer. Then I heard something upstairs. I walked up thinking he might be napping, but the bedroom door was cracked. I pushed it open. He was sitting on our bed, laptop open, talking to someone on Zoom. He didn't see me at first, but I heard everything. She hasn't lawyered up yet. No prenup. Her mom left her a ton. I know we can argue marital property. If I play this right, I could walk away with half. Maybe more. Then he laughed. Laughed. Like he'd just won something. I don't remember walking back down the stairs. I just remember gripping the banister so hard my knuckles hurt. I sat in the garage, door closed, staring at the dryer vent until my vision went blurry. That night, I made dinner. I didn't say a word. Neither did he. He probably figured I was too tired to cook, too distracted to notice the cracks forming around us. What he didn't know was that every word he said, every move he made was painting a clearer picture. Not of a husband, but of a man who had spent the last year biding his time. The next morning, he left early to go on a hike. He said it like it was normal. Like this was just what husbands do. I checked his browsing history the second he left. There were bookmarked links to high-powered divorce attorneys in Chicago, a whole folder labeled Asset Strategy. And the final nail? An email thread between him and a woman named Leslie. I didn't know who she was at first, but then I saw her email signature, Leslie Carter, family law attorney. They'd been talking for over a week. She was coaching him, giving him step-by-step advice on how to prepare for a high-asset exit. She even told him how to gather proof that the money had been commingled so he could claim part of it in court. But he made one mistake. He forwarded one of her emails to his brother and forgot to delete it. His brother. The same guy who once got blackout drunk at our wedding and told me Eric was always chasing shortcuts. I stared at that email for a long time. I should have felt rage or heartbreak. But all I felt was this bone-deep cold, the kind that creeps in when you realize the man who used to tuck your tag in at the back of your shirt was now plotting a strategy to ruin you. That night, I didn't sleep. Again. I pulled out the copy of my mom's will, laid it out next to the emails, and started taking notes. I called her lawyer the next morning and booked an appointment. And then, calmly, like I was ordering lunch, I texted Eric. "Hey, when you get home tonight, let's talk. I think we should separate." He didn't reply, but he came home early, wore a clean shirt, tried to act casual. We sat at the kitchen table where we used to plan road trips and argue over which grocery store had better produce. He asked why. Said things felt salvageable, that we were just going through a phase, that he still loved me. That's when I said it. Quiet. Simple. Eric, I found your emails with Leslie. He froze. And then he lied. Said it wasn't what I thought. That he was just asking questions. That everyone does that when large sums of money are involved. That he was just trying to protect himself in case things went south. But I didn't flinch. I just looked him dead in the eye and said, "You weren't protecting yourself. You were preparing to rob me." His face dropped. He knew I was done. He stood up and said, "If you really want to throw away our marriage over some misinterpreted emails, fine." I let him walk out. I didn't cry. But 2 days later, when I came home from work, the guest room was empty. His shoes were gone. His framed college diploma, too. And on the kitchen counter, he left the divorce papers. He filed, just like he said he would. But what he didn't know, what he still doesn't know, is that by filing first, he triggered something far worse for himself than he could ever imagine. Because my mom didn't just leave me money. She left me a clause. And it's about to burn everything he thought he'd gained to the ground. When Eric filed, he didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. He left the papers on the kitchen table, unsigned on my end, right next to the half-drunk glass of iced tea I'd made before work. Like it was just another bill to pay, another form to drop off at the DMV. I stood there staring at the envelope, my stomach turning like I'd swallowed broken glass. It wasn't that he filed. It was how he did it. After 11 years of shared rent, cold pizza in bed, holidays with his weird Uncle Dean, and all those nights I held him while he cried about losing his job, it all ended in a manila envelope and a text that said, "It's for the best." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat down and read every word. He wanted the house. He wanted half of my retirement. He wanted spousal support. Spousal support. From me? From the woman who worked 3 jobs while he scrolled Reddit in boxers and planned imaginary startups. I remember gripping the edge of the table so hard the wood dented under my thumb. I could hear my pulse in my ears. That night I didn't eat dinner. I just walked to the fireproof safe in the hall closet, pulled out my mother's will, and reread the clause that had once felt like a curious footnote. "All funds and assets shall be withheld until my daughter is no longer legally married. No portion may be released while a spouse remains attached, by law or by claim." It wasn't just a warning. It was a wall. And Eric had just flung himself headfirst into it without even realizing. The next morning, he came home from a run. I say that in quotes because Eric doesn't run. He jogs when he's nervous. And he was sweating like someone who'd just met with a lawyer who told him the money he thought he'd cash in on wasn't his to touch. He tossed his keys on the table like nothing happened. Asked if I wanted Thai for dinner. Said we could talk things out. I asked him flat out, "You talked to Leslie again?" He blinked. "Who?" I didn't answer. I just walked over to the drawer, pulled out the printed email chain, and dropped it in front of him. He didn't even pretend. Just sat down and rubbed his eyes. "Julia, I didn't want it to be like this." "Like what?" I asked. "You mean you didn't want me to find out?" He looked at me, like he was begging me to understand something I couldn't possibly grasp. "I was scared, okay? You changed after your mom died. Everything changed. I didn't want to be left behind." That's when I felt it. This sharp, almost surgical feeling cut through me. Not rage, not betrayal. Clarity. "You weren't scared," I said quietly. "You were greedy. You saw me grieving and thought, perfect, she's vulnerable." He didn't deny it. He just lowered his head, and for a second I thought he might actually apologize. But then he said, "It doesn't matter." I filed. "My lawyer says we can argue commingling. The money might not be protected if it hits your personal accounts. And the house? We're both on the deed. So unless you want to drag this out, we should just split it clean and move on." He smiled like that was a generous offer. And that's when I realized he still didn't know. He hadn't seen the second will. The one Mom had handwritten 6 months after the first. The one she'd signed in front of 2 witnesses and locked away with her estate attorney. The one I found just 2 days ago, quietly mailed to me by Mr. Chandler, her lawyer, with a sticky note that simply read, "When it matters." I hadn't opened it until last night, and what I read made my hands tremble, because it wasn't just a clause. It was a contingency plan. If my daughter becomes the target of legal or financial manipulation as a result of her inheritance, I instruct the executor to place all funds into a protected trust. In the event of divorce, the trust will activate a one-time disbursement. However, if her spouse attempts legal action to acquire any portion, disbursement will be denied permanently. The total value will be redirected to a named charity. It was like watching a trap door open under him. And the best part? He'd already pulled the lever. He had filed. He had initiated the claim. Which meant, by legal definition, he had triggered the disqualification. And my mother's fortune? It now belonged to the Women's Literacy Foundation of Michigan. Every cent. Gone. And if that sounds cruel, if you're reading this thinking, she let it happen, I'll tell you this. I didn't. I made it happen. Because after all the years of defending him to my mother, of shrinking myself to make him feel like more of a man, of carrying the emotional and financial weight of our lives, I finally understood what Mom had tried to teach me. Some people don't need punishment. They just need to be handed a shovel and watched as they dig their own grave. He came back the next day like nothing happened, waved at me from the driveway, like a neighbor returning from a long weekend, not a man who'd just torched our entire life together. "Hey, I figured we could still talk," he said, setting down his gym bag like we had a dinner reservation and not a court date. I didn't say anything, just stood there at the sink, rinsing out the coffee cup he'd left the morning before. The one with the chip on the handle that he never noticed, but I always used because it was his favorite. He talked like a man who thought he still had options. Said maybe the divorce was a mistake, that he'd talk to his lawyer again and there's room to renegotiate the terms if we're civil. That word, civil, hit me like a slap. This wasn't about civility. This was about survival, about me surviving him. His control, his gaslighting, his carefully rationed affection that dried up the second I said no. I dried the cup, turned to him, said calmly, "Eric, it's done. You filed, you pushed, you made your play, and now the game's over." His jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're just gonna throw away everything?" I looked him right in the eyes and said, "No." "You did." He stormed upstairs without another word. I heard drawers slam, hangers scrape, the zip of luggage. 15 minutes later, he was dragging a suitcase down the hallway like he hadn't just spent the past 11 years calling this house home. I followed him to the door. He stopped, turned. "I hope you're happy living alone with your money." I didn't flinch. I'm happy not living with someone who only loved me when I was broke. He didn't respond, just walked out. The silence after the door clicked shut was deafening. Not peaceful, not yet, but still. Like a house finally exhaling after holding its breath too long. But that wasn't the end. 2 weeks after he moved out, I got a letter from his attorney. A formal motion to contest the will's conditions. He was claiming undue influence. That my mom had manipulated me. That I had pressured her into adding the disinheritance clause out of spite. I sat at the kitchen table reading the motion over a cup of cold coffee. My hand didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just stared. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about legacy. About the last thing my mother ever gave me being dragged through the mud by the same man she'd spent years trying to protect me from. I called her lawyer, Mr. Chandler. He listened patiently, then asked me to come in. When I got there, he handed me a thick envelope. "I was hoping we wouldn't need this," he said. "But your mother, she planned for everything." Inside was a flash drive, a password-protected folder, a video file. I drove home and opened it on my laptop, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor like a kid sneaking TV after midnight. And there she was, my mom, wearing that old gray sweater with the little hole in the collar, hair pulled back, sitting in her living room. She looked into the camera and said, "If you're watching this, it means Eric's doing exactly what I thought he might." My breath caught in my throat. "I didn't add that clause out of spite," she continued. "I added it to protect you from someone I believe doesn't love you the way you deserve. I hope I'm wrong. God, I hope I'm wrong. But just in case." She reached beside her and held up a folder. "This is everything. Every email he ever sent me asking for money. Every voicemail he left that you never heard. I recorded the call when he asked for a $50,000 gift to help fund that app idea he and Ryan cooked up." I froze. I'd never heard about that call, never seen that folder. She kept talking, calm, composed. "I didn't say yes. I didn't even tell you, because I knew if I did, you'd defend him. You'd say he was trying, that he had potential. So I documented it all. I gave Mr. Chandler instructions to release it to the court only if Eric tried to challenge the estate." My hands were shaking now. She finished with, "And if he does, give him my regards." The video ended. For the first time in months, I laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bitter. Just pure relief. Like she was still here. Like she'd never left. And then I did what she'd told me to do. I called Mr. Chandler, sent the drive, gave permission to release the full record as part of discovery. 3 days later, I got another letter from Eric's lawyer, a formal notice of withdrawal. No explanation, no apology. He gave up, just like he always did. But this time, it wasn't my job to carry him. The court hearing was quiet, quieter than I expected. I sat at the long table across from Eric and his attorney in that stiff, echoing room, the kind with plastic pitchers of water no one ever drinks and chairs that make your back ache after 10 minutes. He looked thinner than I remembered. Not in a way that made me feel bad for him, but in that way people look when they've finally run out of story to spin. No more schemes, no more plans, no more, "Let's talk this through like adults." Just a man sitting in front of a judge, facing the consequences of what he never thought anyone would hold him accountable for. Mr. Chandler submitted the video file and all supporting documents my mother had prepared. The judge didn't even ask me to speak. He read quietly for a while, flipping pages like it was all textbook, because it was. My mom made sure of that. Every loan Eric had requested, every voicemail he'd left her begging for just a little help this once, every subtle threat wrapped in politeness, it was all there. When the judge looked up, he didn't waste time. "The court sees clear evidence of financial manipulation and intent to misappropriate inherited funds. The decedent's clause will be honored. Motion to contest is denied. The estate will not be accessible to the respondent under any circumstance. Case closed." Just like that. I felt a single tear fall, not because I was sad, not because I pitied him, but because after all the silence, the doubting myself, the years of bending over backwards for a man who only saw me as leverage, justice finally said my name out loud. Eric didn't look at me once. Not when they handed down the ruling. Not when he stood and gathered his papers. He didn't say a word, just walked out like someone who'd missed the train and finally realized it wasn't coming back. A week later, I got the call from Mr. Chandler. The trust had cleared. The inheritance was officially mine. Every last dollar. Not because I fought harder, but because my mother had known me better than I knew myself. She knew I wouldn't see the knife coming until it was already in my back. So she built the shield long before I needed it. And now, I had something better than money. I had peace. I sold the house. I couldn't stay there anymore. Too many memories that felt like ghosts. Some good, some I was ready to leave behind. I bought a small place in Traverse City, a little craftsman with a wraparound porch and a garden big enough for tomatoes and grief to grow side by side. I started painting again. I hadn't done that since college. Eric always said it was a cute hobby, but not a good use of time. So I painted late at night with music on low and the windows open. I painted the view my mom loved most. Lake Michigan at dusk, when the sky looked like it was holding its breath before it went dark. I traveled. Italy, then New Mexico. Took a solo hiking trip in Arizona. Spent a week with no cell service, just a journal and my feet. I met people who didn't ask me what I did for a living, but asked me what I loved. Eric never reached out again. Not after the court ruling. Not after the trust was finalized. I heard through a friend of a friend that he moved to Indiana. Lives in a one-bedroom apartment above a vape shop. Still trying to launch some kind of podcast on finance for creatives. And I won't lie to you. Sometimes I still get angry. Not at him, really. At myself. For not seeing it sooner. For defending him when no one else did. For wasting so much of my heart on someone who only ever saw me as a means to an end. But then I look at that photo on my mantle. Me and Mom, arms around each other, laughing so hard we were both blurry. And I remind myself, I didn't lose everything. I found myself. And that's worth more than any fortune. If I've learned anything from this, it's that love isn't measured by how much you give up for someone. It's measured by how much they protect your heart when you have nothing left to give. Thanks for listening to this. If you've ever been in a relationship where something just felt off, but you couldn't name it, please trust that feeling. And if you've been through something like this, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, feel free to subscribe. I don't share often, but when I do, I promise it's real. See you next time. And Mom, if you're listening, I hope you're proud. You saved me. Again.